Well, if that sounds awfully high and mighty, I'd like to point out that the story of the Constitution is more than just flowery words and pompous concepts. It's also the story of people, beginning with the founders themselves, who are more interesting than you might suspect. For example, did you know that James Madison, who was an architect of the Constitution and our nation's fourth president, was said to look at times like a poodle? Or that Aaron Burr, who was vice president under Thomas Jefferson, killed Alexander Hamilton, another important architect of the Constitution, in a duel. Or that George Washington's false teeth were actually made of hippopotamus ivory. We have this blueprint, the Constitution, because the founders of our country made choices. They chose to fight for their beliefs, but more important, they chose to plan ahead. So what would America be like if they hadn't chosen to plan ahead? Do you have any ideas? What if we didn't have the Constitution?
We may not be in school.
Well, yeah, you might not be in school. You might not be in school learning about this. Yeah.
There wouldn't be no laws.
Well, there wouldn't be any laws. Yeah, well, there might be some laws, but they would be loosely organized, maybe state by state, and no laws that would apply to everybody.
There would be no speed limits. Like, there would be a lot of accidents.
Well, actually, the Constitution doesn't set speed limits. That would be up to the highways and the Department of Transportation and in your state. So that would be something that would be their responsibility. The Constitution contains laws that apply to everybody across the nation. So, for instance, one thing in the Constitution is that that women can vote. So for a long time, women couldn't vote, and that was something that was added to the Constitution. There are things in there about what's the First Amendment.
Freedom of the press.
Yeah, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, assembly, and the press. Very good. So that says that we can say pretty much whatever we want. We can say if we don't like our government, then we can say that. Whereas maybe in Britain a long time ago, if you said something against the government, you might be put in jail. That means that we can say that we like a person's works, even if those works are banned in other places. So freedom of speech is a really, really powerful amendment, and it's one of the things that makes us Americans. What is the Second Amendment?
Freedom of speech?
Actually, that's the First Amendment. The Second Amendment is actually something that's kind of controversial. A lot of people have been arguing about it for a long time. But what is the Second Amendment?
Freedom of the press?
First Amendment, right? So the First Amendment contains the freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. So the Second Amendment is something completely different. It's the freedom to bear arms. Does anyone want to tell me what that means? Well, the freedom to bear arms is an amendment that says that people of the United States can have firearms or guns, right? So that has been, the interpretation of that has been considered in a lot of different places. So in some cities, they don't want you to have concealed handguns. In other cities, it's okay. So that is something that has been really changed and shaped and argued about for a long time. So when you hear someone say the Second Amendment, then you know what they're talking about. So now let's review. Would you like to tell me one thing you've learned today? Sorry?
I learned the three branches of government.
You learn the three branches of government. Very good. And what are the three branches of government?
Executive, judicial, and legislative.
Executive, judicial, and legislative. Excellent. Okay, so executive, judicial, and legislative. Would anybody else like to tell me something they've learned today? And I'm going to find the Bill of Rights so I can just show you the amendments. Let's see. Okay, go ahead. Another thing you've learned today.
I learned what the word monarchy means.
You learn what the word monarchy means. Very good. Okay, so here is the Bill of Rights. It's actually on the National Archives website. So here's what it says. During the debates on the adoption of the Constitution, its opponents repeatedly charged that the Constitution as drafted would open the way to tyranny by the central government. Well, okay, so they demanded a Bill of Rights that would spell out the immunities of individual citizens. So, let's see. Yeah, so actually this is maybe a good website to visit on your own time as well, the archives.gov Bill of Rights, and you'll be able to learn more of the Constitution. So that's the government's website about that, and it looks like a pretty cool website. So the Constitution is a blueprint for our government, and it also contains amendments that allow us to have freedom in many ways, like freedom of speech, for instance, which is, I think, one of the most important. And it's one that really makes us Americans, because in other countries around the world, freedom of speech is not something that is guaranteed, so that is really quite an important right. So now I can take your questions. If you have any questions you would like to ask me, I'd be happy to answer them.
Who is your favorite president?
Who is my favorite president? Oh, let's see, that is a good question. Well, maybe, let's see, I have been learning about a lot of different presidents. I was recently watching, I don't know if any of you have seen any of this, but the National Parks, the documentary. And I actually visited Yellowstone National Park, and it was really fun. And I think the national parks are a really great way to experience the nature of our country. And so Teddy Roosevelt was a really important figure in making the national parks. There's actually a funny story. You know, Teddy Roosevelt really liked to go hunting, right? But in the national parks, you don't hunt. So when he was at one of the national parks, then he said, "Oh, I really, really feel like hunting something." But he didn't, obviously, since you're not allowed to. So the only thing he killed that day was a tiny little mouse, because he saw it and thought it was some kind of new species of mouse, and he grabbed it, but it was just a common mouse. So I thought that was a kind of funny story. That was actually on the National Parks documentary. So Teddy Roosevelt was a great president. I thought that was pretty funny.
How did your school day go?
How does my school day go? That is an excellent question. Well, I actually go to an online school called the Washington Virtual Academies, and it's like yours in that we have homework and field trips and teachers, but we do access our lessons online, so a little different. Okay, and 2 more questions.
Are you rich?